Welcome to the One Player Podcast, the show on solitaire board games. I'm your host, Albert, and this is episode 361.
We're gonna cause trouble.
Uh-oh, that does not sound good, Julius.
Why not, Albert? You have no trust in me.
I'm not good at trouble. I am not good at trouble.
Then you're not going to be nearly as good at this game.
Oh, maybe, okay. I'm good at mischief, though.
Oh, are you now?
Yes, just not trouble.
I don't know the difference between those two, but let us go ahead and jump into the game for this week. How about?
Okay, let's do that. Mythic Mischief.
We are talking about, yes, Mythic Mischief today. Mythic Mischief is, at its face, a head-to-head game where you are both playing as Hogwarts-ish or magic-type classrooms with all sorts of different creatures and races, so there's like vampires and golems and trolls and all sorts of things mixing it together.
Mm-hmm. And it kind of reminded me of what is it, Monster High, the cartoon?
Yes. And it happens to be recess, and each of you are competing to cause the headmaster to catch more of your classmates than you. And this is a head-to-head board game. There is a solo mode with an AI-ish opponent that cheats a little bit that you're going to be fighting with as you're playing over the course of the game. But primarily, it is this head-to-head where you're trying to gain more points than the other player.
And when you say head-to-head, it's 1 to 4 heads total. Is that right?
First,
that's what I'm seeing online. Mythic Mischief, yes.
I mean, technically you can play at 4, but really it's just 1v1.
Oh, okay.
There's some variants for playing up to 4. I would say that solo is a variant as well. And I've never done the up to 4 version.
Okay. I did. Yeah, it's not clear about that when you're reading the website and looking at the game.
Well, it's a good thing we've discussed it now.
Yep. Okay, so tell me about the components then.
So, discussing the components. Let's talk about some of the nicer components first. Each team has a set of minis. So that are plastic color minis that are in the color of your team. So, like blue or red or gray or whatever it is. And there are different minis for each of the different ones. In fact, each of the different teams have 3 characters, and those characters have like a whole history that's provided in the rulebook for each of the different characters. So you can really, get into all of the puns on all of the different characters. But each of them will have 3 minis. Each of those teams will also have a set of books that you're going to be used out on the board that are going to be sort of like a mini objective to chase after, as well as a set of, they're not dice, they're cubes. They look an awful lot like dice, but they're spin down cubes, they're spin down dice, where you'll use it to keep track of how many actions you'll have on the various different tracks. Speaking of tracks, each player will also have essentially a double-layered player mat that is used to keep track of your various actions. You'll place those cubes I just mentioned on it, and there'll be markings along the top of each of the tracks. So, for instance, your move track might be labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. You'll have 2 cubes on it. If they're in the starting spot, that 1 cube will be listed as 1 cube will list as 2, and you'll use that to track that you have 3 moves. As you take a move, you'll tick your 2 down to a 1, take another one, your 1 will go down to 0, take another one, your last one will go down to 0. So use those for keeping track of actions between those cubes. The books you'll place on that mat to be able to bump cubes up higher. Those are your player boards, your player components. There is a main board that each of the players are going to be putting them on. That main board is going to be the library. It is a 5x5 grid layout. On that grid, there's going to be some cardboard messy tokens or cluttered spaces, as well as some plastic shelves the cluttered spaces will make you move slower as you go through it, and the shelves will just simply block your way. In addition, there is on the main board the Tomekeeper, the headmaster. He is another big mini, and he's going to be walking around the board. He always is walking towards one of the objectives on the board. The game will start with 3 objectives, and he'll go to each of the objectives in turn. So you can predict and control where it is that he's using. As he steps on one of the other players, that player will be removed from the game, removed from the board for that round. They'll come right back in, but that will give you a point by having the headmaster step on it. There's a track at the bottom of that library board that is used to control how much it is, and you'll use one of your book tokens to be able to do that. There's a set of cards. There's 1 cards that show the board layout between those books and cluttered spaces before lunch and after lunch. So at one point in time, it's going to switch when everything's all filled up. So he's going to have 6 objectives over the course of the game. So those cards will show what it is. And then there's a set of cards that are used for the solo mode that are essentially going to be the they call them the detention cards. I like calling them the trap cards, but they're cards that lay down some traps across the board that when you're playing solo have an extra set of effects that you'll have to be on the lookout for. And that's all the components.
Okay, doesn't sound like too much.
It's really not a lot, to tell you the honest truth. What has a lot more is the fact that there's so many different factions, especially if you've gotten all the expansions as I have done. So at that point in time, there's a lot of different factions in the board, and each one of them comes with their own set of 3 minis, their own set of cubes, their own set of books cubes, and that starts to build up. In addition, I've got 2 library boards. I've got a Castle Gardens board, a set of clutter tokens and bookshelves for each one of those boards. So technically I could play up to a 6-player game. So yeah, that's where the stuff starts to get a little more voluminous than is necessary.
I see. Okay. The base game itself is not too big. And there's 2 base games, is that right? Looks like there's a volume 1 and volume 2. Are they both standalone?
They are both standalone, and theoretically, you can even print off a mat, and you can even just play without those if you wanted. If you just get 2 of the expansions, it's a weird thing to do, but you could. But that's more like print and play type stuff. So yes, there's 2 standalone entry level boxes. There's additional expansion boxes that add additional factions, and each one of those is something different. So yeah, that's what we're talking about in terms of expansions.
Right. I will say I don't like the art style a lot in the game. I don't like the way the different characters look. They look too cutesy, really.
Too cutesy?
The creepy characters are cutesy. Yeah. Yeah, like the vampires are cute high school vampires, or maybe even almost middle school, and that sort of thing.
Are you talking about in the art on the rule book, or are you talking about the art and the figures?
Not the figures, the rule book, and I guess the boards and stuff like that.
I will say, I don't think I pay that much attention to those pieces. I spend a lot more time looking at the minis. And if you've seen any of the minis, I think the minis are really highly detailed. It gives a sense of who the characters are, what they look like. I feel like they probably do match the cutesy character of the game, but I think the minis are really highly detailed, and I enjoy the sculpts of the minis. I think all those looks really nice.
Okay, maybe if they're unpainted, I wouldn't notice it as much. Though you could get painted or unpainted versions of the game.
I have all the unpainted stuff.
Okay. And anyway, so that's a component. It's it's not a bad style, I suppose, but I don't like it personally.
Yeah. I'm going to come back when we get around to gameplay about some of the iconizations on things. I normally discuss that sort of stuff here at this point in time, but so much of it is gameplay dependent on some of my comments on that I'm just going to come back to that later.
Oh, look at this. The solo mode is by Nick Shaw and David Turshi. He makes solo modes for every single game, doesn't he?
He makes a lot.
Does that guy ever sleep?
I'm sure he does.
Wow. He can't. There's just no time. Okay, anyway, so theme. Do you feel like you're in a magical high school?
I definitely feel like I'm causing mischief.
Okay. We'll take that.
I don't know about a magical high school because there's no classes, there's none of that stuff going on. Mm-hmm. But the idea of causing mischief, the idea of trying to get the other players in trouble with the teacher definitely comes through. If you're familiar with Monster Inc., for example, so at one point in time Monsters U, I think, whatever it is, the sequel to it, where they go back in time and they're now in university. There's one scene where you're sneaking around the library and you're trying not to make noise so that you don't get caught by the librarian. And
Hmm.
this strongly makes me think of that scene, perhaps because it's so thematically tied, but it's very much what's going on. You're trying to sneak around and avoid the Tomekeeper, while at the same time trying to lead the Tomekeeper over to get your friends in trouble. And I think that theme really strongly comes through. So maybe nothing about necessarily being in school, but any of this trying
Hmm.
to get caught definitely comes through.
All right. So then, how about the rules?
Um, I have nothing particular to comment about the rules. The game is, it's not that complicated, I think. The basic generic portion of the game is pretty simple. There is, yeah, I think that the basic generic part of the game is pretty simple. Some of it can get more complicated, as we're going to talk about with some of the player powers. And I think some of it might have made simpler about the idea of presenting how it is that the player powers are organized and aligned. That doesn't necessarily come through, but I think it's clear enough to pick it up. I think it's fine.
Okay. I will say I did not find rules on BGG, but if you go to the publisher's website and you look at how to learn how to play, if you scroll down through all the videos, you'll find a PDF of the rule book. There's videos on learning how to play, and there's also just the rule book if that's what you want, and it's on the publisher's website.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit hard to find, but yeah, it looks fine to me. The rule book looks fine. Um, it's organized pretty well, I think, from glancing through it. I haven't read it, so
Yeah,
but
I
it
wish
looks
that
easy to
some of
use.
the stuff from the Kickstarter were a bit easier to find in terms of rulebooks since you brought it up. But it's
Ah,
available on the Kickstarter, make it easier. But yeah, it would be nice if some of those things. The most recent version of the rules has a separate document for the rules versus the rules for all of the different player powers. So there's a separate
okay, yeah,
book with all the player powers, and that is not implemented online, and I wish it was.
and that includes all the expansion
Yeah,
monsters and or teams.
everything, every possible one is included in a single rule book, and that's just not
Okay,
there yet.
okay, all right. So then, talk about the gameplay,
I
please.
would love to. So, there are four basic types of actions that you can use on your turn. So again, the general idea is you have your three people out on the library board, and you have the Tomekeeper, and the Tomekeeper is heading to, let's say at the beginning of the game, he's headed towards objective slot 1. There is a path that he's going to be walking towards it, and at the beginning of the game he moves 4 spaces towards that path. If he stops over any of the cluttered spaces, he's going to spend 2 moves moving onto that cluttered space, as will anybody else. Your goal is to use your abilities to stick your opponents into the spaces that the Tomekeeper is moving. If you manage to stick your opponents in those spaces, the Tomekeeper is going to march over them and knock them out. If you
Mhm.
use some other special ability to move the Tomekeeper over your opponents, it's going to knock them out. Every time you knock them out, they're removed from the game until the start of their next turn. So you only ever get removed for a very short amount of time. So it doesn't leave you feeling like, hey, I'm behind because I got knocked out. In fact, some of the time when you get knocked out, because it's a quick way to get across the board or pick where it is that you want to come out, it's helpful to get knocked out. But you usually don't want to give them points. But every time you get knocked out, the other player gets a point. The various abilities that you have change based on which faction you're playing as. There are 2 abilities that are consistent for everyone: the move ability and the distract ability. Move lets you simply move your faction around. The distract ability lets you summon the Tomekeeper towards you using the shortest path possible. There's multiple paths you get to pick, but you can use the distract ability to summon him towards you. Then every team has a ability that messes with allies and an ability that messes with bookshelves. They all do all sorts of different ways of doing both of those things. So, for example, one of the factions might mess with, and with, if I said allies, I meant enemies, but One of them might mess with enemies by throwing them to the opposite side of your character. One of them might rotate clockwise around your character. One of them might move an enemy out of the space that you're in. All sorts of different things. Similarly with bookshelves, one might bounce bookshelves to the space right behind. One might rotate them around your character. One might teleport it to another one of your characters. One might move it along with you moving your characters. So many different ways that they have for configuring all of those different abilities. There's each of those abilities are sort of represented iconically on each of the boards. So there's a generic version of the move ability on everyone's board, and there's a generic distract on everyone's boards. Those ones, you'll learn those ones. The different abilities are all sort of referenced on the board, and there's like corner cases that aren't mentioned about how is it and when is it you do it. Like a common thing is you can't completely block off a section. But so many of them have these corner cases, and so many of them are sometimes hard to interpret what the specific thing, that specific picture is telling you about how it is that it means to do.
Mm.
It becomes even harder as I get to the last two special things. Each faction also has a legendary ability. These are kind of a once per game big thing that you can do. It's tracked by having a book on the space for the legendary. And these are, big move type things. Like one of them lets you move everyone adjacent to one of your characters away. One of them lets you swap spots between an enemy and the Tomekeeper. One of them lets you move the Tomekeeper away from you. One of them lets you teleport to wherever it is you want. There's so many different things again. And again, all of these are sort of iconographically referenced on the player boards. And again, sometimes it's hard to interpret what is that those mean. Sometimes it's hard to fully catch those things. But everyone has that legendary ability. Theoretically, as you go around collecting more books, you'll be able to refresh those legendaries to be able to use them more, but at the cost of not leveling up some of your other abilities. In addition, the last special thing everyone has is an after lunch special. Once the Tomekeeper has picked up his first 3 objective tokens, the game will shift to after lunch. At that point in time, the Tomekeeper will move slower, but everyone will have, theoretically, everyone will be leveled up more by that point in time, but also everyone will gain an extra ability that they can trigger once per turn. And again, all these abilities do all sorts of different things. And these are even more obtuse about what it is that these things can do. You will have no way of interpreting the hieroglyphics for what these things mean without reading the ability. Maybe with the other ones, you can use the general idea that you move an ally or enemy, that you move a bookshelf. Maybe for the legendaries, it's kind of clear. The after lunch specials, there's no way you would ever understand some of these hieroglyphics, some of these references, without just reading over the rulebook's explanation for what these abilities do.
Yeah, I'm looking at the one for the wizards, the after lunch specials portals, and it says you may drop a portal token on the wizard space once per turn. And the icon looks like, I guess it's 2 wizards in a portal with arrows pointing to each other.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that has to do with dropping a portal.
So the idea is that
sense.
the portals you can use to translate to the portals are adjacent, so you can move from one portal to the other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but the image is nothing about dropping at all on a space. It's like you're saying, they're kind of weird.
Yeah, it just requires reading the rule books. You will want to refer to every time you're playing, especially if you're playing as a player, as a faction you've not played before. You will want to refer to the rule book for how it is that you do that. So you will use those abilities to move around other players, move around the Tomekeeper. The Tomekeeper each time will continue walking around. After he gets to all 6, that will end the game, and whoever has the most amount of points wins. Or if any player has the full 10, that player will win. Let me briefly mention the gameplay for the solo, and then I'll talk more about my thoughts about some of the gameplay.
Before we move on, I'm looking at the rule book and the different factions. The 4 in the book, they are on the PDF. it's a 2-page spread for each faction, and you could easily print that out, and it would be a nice handout you could have. But that's only available for the first 4 factions.
That's why I have
Mm-hmm.
that separate book with each of the different player powers.
Yeah, and that would be so handy as a printout or as a handout that you could have, so you could just pull out the one faction instead of having to pass the book around to everybody back and forth.
Yeah, I'm not sure because I
No?
want to know also what the opponent
Oh,
does as
okay.
well as me.
Okay, fair
So,
enough.
yeah.
Okay,
Nonetheless,
solo.
with solo, the way solo works is that you're playing against essentially an AI bot set of players. The bot set of players, so you play all of your stuff normally. The bot players have a special enchanted turn. The enchanted are going to assess each one of them individually. So you'll look at each of the different enchanted players, and they will all have a goal. They earn points not only by knocking you out, they also earn points just by getting books. Each enchanted looks around and they each have a movement of 3 spaces. If they can reach a book, they will go get a book and get a point. If they cannot get a book, they will move to one of your people and move one of your people closer to the Tomekeeper. If they can't reach one of your guys, then they're just going to spend their whole 3 actions getting farther away from all of the action, just to make it harder for you to score points. They can be dumb. Because they are following such a rigid set of powers, they can be really dumb. Now that they have the advantage of essentially having 9 movement across them per turn, and you, when you start the game, have 3, and when you fully level up, you can often get to 9, but they start fully leveled up from the beginning. So they can get all the way around the board really fast and really move around a whole lot. So that is the first thing they do. And also their movement, they don't use any of their regular abilities. They just hop onto your space and then move you adjacent. Sort of like one of the players, but they can be just doing anyone they want. Because they are dumb, they have an additional ability. They also have detention cards, what I call trap cards. There are 3 trap cards that you play with that show you all sorts of different traps that the enchanted have put across the board. So they can have traps that will push you in a certain direction. They will have traps that will actually have the Tomekeeper auto catch you and knock you out. They will have traps that will trip you and make you so you can't move. And then they will just have spots where new tomes come out because they're constantly eating tomes. So there's constantly putting more tomes back in. So they will have those different types of traps that come out on the board. There's a set of 3 that come out, and you don't know which one of those 3 is going to be triggered. So it could be that you thought you were in a space that was completely safe, but then because the wrong card got activated, it triggered a trap in your space, and it made you get caught, and it gave them the point, and that could have won them the game. It's difficult. It definitely adds difficulty with those traps coming out that are very hard, in my opinion, or at least the way it is that the amount of brain power that I can put in to tracking the location of all of those different traps and understanding where to move and where to move them into and how to move different things around and throw that in there. Whew, that adds a certain level of spice to the game that adds a little more complexity. Now, I will say, it's likely that complexity is the same amount as is present on the main versions, because in the main versions, you have to, in addition to thinking about what it is that you're doing, you have to also think about what the other player's doing and how it is that they can move and where it is that they can affect. And so there's all of that logic and thought and brain power that gets mixed on in as well for the opponent. So I'm not sure that it's more difficult to do, but it certainly adds a level of brain burn to be able to keep track of those 3 different card states and where it is that you want to be and what the likelihood of you being out there is. There is an unofficially released, or the game can get up to hard modes about how it is, and then there's ways of implementing some developer ways of doing even harder modes than is printed in the game, I have difficulty with it on hard mode.
Oh
I
wow,
find it
okay.
I find it difficult. I find it hard to win on this. And maybe that's just me being bad at the game, but I find it difficult.
That's okay because that just means the game will last longer as you get better at it.
Yes.
Hmm.
The game has continued to last. That is not to say that I don't enjoy that. I enjoy both the multiplayer, the 1v1
Hmm.
game, as well as the solo mode for the game. I enjoy both of those. This became a game that my daughter and I picked up and now play a lot of. Of late, we actually both own the app of it and play even more of it on the app than the physical. But we
Ah,
play a
okay.
lot of it together with her versus me. The app just recently implemented the solo detention mode on the solo version. Um, so I've had a chance to at least see if the app has a little bit more of it, and so play a little bit of that. I'm not sure if I prefer the app version of this. It's literally one for one with it. I'm not sure if I prefer playing on the app solo or on the board solo. Um,
Hmm.
Difficult choice, possibly because it helps with the brain burn for trying to keep track of those three different cards. I'm not sure yet. I haven't really
Yeah.
decided that yet. But if you want to try it out and you just want to try the app, then the app is free. as,
Okay.
long as long as you don't want to get too many of the different factions, you can certainly try it out with the app.
Ah.
I definitely enjoy the app. It's just limited on which factions you have available. But that is entirely besides the point. We are playing it a lot and we are enjoying it a lot. There is a lot of competitive thought that goes into how it is that you win, how it is that you move it. The developers went during the Kickstarter had like these puzzles where you would look at the board and figure out, well, how can I use my characters to get all three of the opposing players' mythics caught on a single turn and thus score
Hmm.
3 points? A lot of the time, each turn devolves into this mini puzzle of how can I use everything I have accessible to me to get as much points as possible. And often you feel like there feels like there's a way of getting 3 points per turn. There feels like there's a way. And it's especially annoying to me when I'm playing against people who are even better than me. Like, I just don't see any way of getting three. So rather than hold you here while I think about it long, I'm just going to do two. And it's like, well, since you've done two, here's how you do three. I'm like, yeah,
Oh, jerk.
dang it. So it always feels like this cool little puzzle. Each turn feels like a cool little puzzle of how best to use your resources to get the most amount of points and keep yourself safe and set yourself up and make sure that you're staying away from them. These little puzzles each time just continue to pull you in and keep you wanting to play that. All of that is very cool. What
Hmm.
also is really neat, this is a 1v1 game. Very often with 1v1 games, it feels very not degenerative, but you're spending a lot of your time with 1v1 games just attacking the other player, just destroying and tearing down their stuff and like destroying their troops and
Hmm.
sending them on back. Like if you're playing a war game against another person, so you've got your army, they've got their army, and you go into battle, and slowly you're just depriving yourself of the other army until they have no more units left.
Yeah, a lot of times the game is very static until somebody could do something to change it.
Right. And then when all of that changes, you just get beat and you're just left without troops and you have nothing to do and you're just out of resources. This is the opposite about that, and I love it. It is a 1v1 game where it never feels like the other player getting points hurts you. If anything, the other player getting points, other than the fact that they got a point, but it kind of helps you because it gives you an ability to reconfigure and move your mythics around the board. It gives you a lot of openness about where it is that you want to be, where it is that you want your mythics to return back to the library board on the next turn. You're only ever out of the board, only ever out of the game until your turn starts again. Then you're back up to your full three mythics, and you get to continue running around the board, causing more mischief for the other player. It doesn't feel detrimental to me when you get points. You just got a point, and now I get to come back in, and I'm going to score 3 points on you, and we're going to keep taking turns doing really well together. It feels very encouraging. It doesn't feel defeating when you get defeated, and that's awesome.
That is neat. Now, I was surprised when I saw the picture of the board, and it's so tiny. It's only 5 by 5, and I said that just sounds small and cramped, but as you describe the game, it's very puzzle like. It makes sense
Uh-huh.
that it's not a huge board. It makes sense that it's a pretty small board.
Yeah.
It
It's
sounds
not
all
very
right.
big. It's very chess-ish like in that it's a small board, just a lot of grid-based movement. You only have
Yep.
excuse me. You only have 7 pieces on the board. Your 3, their 3, and the Tomekeeper. So it doesn't have to be so big. Keeping it all tight means that there's a lot of movement, a lot of things you can do. If people spread out, you'd have to move around a lot more. A lot of stuff can happen. A lot of thought can go into your turns. This mini puzzle every time I will sit at the board, when this is one reason why I very much enjoy the solo ones, because when I'm playing multiplayer, often I will have that tantalizing feeling of there's a solution here. If
Mhm.
only I can find it. I just need to find it. And when you're playing versus another player, there's a limited amount of time that I really feel like I can have the other person sit there while I find that tantalizing solution. When I'm playing solo, ain't nobody going to stop me from sitting here
Mhm.
for the 5 minutes it's going to take me to figure out the best way to get all of these people out, which maybe helps with the fact that, hey, there's like this extra overload of brain power about extra stuff, doing things about the 3 different cards and the different traps and the different possibilities and all those things, because it's solo and I can spend the time fully processing all of those without feeling bogged down. So,
Mhm.
yeah,
And the app version, is it asynchronous, so you could also spend a lot of time just thinking about it?
it is. It is completely
Nice.
asynchronous. You can play it synchronous, but
Yeah.
it doesn't mind if you spend, because normally when I'm playing with my daughter, we give each other up to 24 hours per turn and you have a full 5 strikes. So even if you spend 5 days thinking about your turn, you won't lose. You'll be you'll be just fine. You can spend as much time as you want thinking about your turn.
Nice. Okay. That sounds interesting. It sounds really interesting.
I think it is very fun. I highly recommend it. If you're interested in a 1v1 experience where you get to combat and you get to have this puzzle feeling of trying to use all of your resources to solve this miniature puzzle on the board, I think that this is a game that you will really like, and I highly recommend it.
Hmm. I think you convinced me with two things: puzzly, and chess like.
Yep.
That just sounds interesting to me.
And that is what convinced me. Try out the app, see if you like the app, because I think the app is a really good implementation of it. The game is small, even on the physical version it's small. So many of the times when I
Yeah.
say when there is an app, like many other games, the app is trying to take a big game and make it small the size of your phone.
Oh yeah, and that's just painful.
Right, this one, it's not that big to begin with, so it fits on your phone really well. So, yeah, try out
Yeah.
the app, see how you like it if you want to try that out for free without even buying the game, or just go buy the game, because I don't think you really lose out.
Yeah, well, it's a little bit expensive. It's $60 for the game for the 4 factions. And when you say small, is it about this? It's smaller than the size of a sheet of paper, right?
The board,
Yeah, or is it about that?
it's like 10 by 15, I think, for the board.
Oh, okay, so bigger than a sheet of paper.
Yeah, I'd have to
Yeah, it
give it a
doesn't look
measure.
like it in the picture.
Yeah, I think it's like 10 by 15. That's not too much bigger than a sheet of paper.
Well, if it's 10 by 15, that means the minis. Oh yeah, I guess the minis are about an inch wide across, and the space is about 2.
Yeah,
Okay. Yep. I see it.
yeah. Now I have to go measure
Neat.
it.
Regardless, it's not a huge board, no matter what.
Albert is causing me mischief by making me measure things in the middle of a podcast.
Well, yeah, you better go do that then before you get caught.
All right. Well, I'm off to go cause mischief for all the members of my family at this point.
All right, Julius. Bye bye.
Have a good night, all. Thanks for listening. We love feedback, so we love hearing from you. You can reach me at julius@oneplayerpodcast.com or JLBird on BGG, and Albert can be reached at albert@oneplayerpodcast.com or Fractaloon on BGG. Our website is oneplayerpodcast.com with the number 1, and we're also on Twitter at oneplayerpodcast. The intro music is copyright Angus, can be found at jamendo.com. The transition music is copyright by Dan El Duce Pancaldi, whose page is at donpancaldi.com. The One Player Podcast is protected under a Creative Commons share-alike license. Thanks for listening.